We have the opportunity today to learn together a little bit about an amazing book or potentially pair of books in Tanakh, Ezra and Nehemiah, or the one book of Ezra-Nehemiah. And I'm so excited to share a few timely thoughts related to this book over the next 20 minutes or so. Many people kind of never get this far in Tanakh. You really have to have plowed through a lot to get there. But I think it records this really kind of amazing moment in Jewish history. And in addition to all of that, has many, many kind of timeless, resonant lessons that hopefully we'll talk about. Kind of three that I feel like are particularly meaningful at this moment. I'm sure when you read Ezra-Nehemiah in a little while in 929, you will come up with even more, and it will be a different moment and you'll feel different parts of it. And that's what's exciting about learning texts that you can come back to and perpetually learn more about, is that wherever you're standing in that moment carries a lot into how you read that text when you're reading it. And that's what's so special about the Torah. Or in this case, the Ketuvim, I guess. But where I'm standing right now, and where we will all be standing when this comes out, is we're all kind of stuck in our homes in the middle of this coronavirus pandemic, and it's very scary. And my thoughts are very strongly with all of the people who have the virus, who are at home, who are not at home, but in the hospital even, and really suffering, for the families of those who have already lost people to this horrible, horrible disease. And then also to all of our healthcare professionals who are not at home because they're fighting this on the front lines with inadequate equipment, often, and understaffed, and putting themselves and their families at risk. And to those people, we're so grateful. And to everyone else, we have you in our tefillot, and obviously all of our learning, and every possible merit that we can accrue through what we're doing together here should be directed in that regard. And the other thing about this moment right now is that it's really almost Pesach. And that's also very strange and confusing. And Pesach is usually this time of coming together and of celebration and joy and feeling free. And that's not necessarily how everyone's feeling right now. And I actually think that Ezra-Nehemiah has a few moments that really kind of capture those conflicting emotions. But that's where we're going. So we'll start at the beginning. I'm going to screen share a PowerPoint, but hopefully it will also be attached in all the places where this is posted, so you can follow along in your own time also. Maybe share this. Okay. Cool. So that's what we're doing, and that's my name. So what time period is Ezra-Nehemiah? It's actually not the first time. If you're reading through Tanakh kind of in order, we've seen this time period already. At the end of Treyasar, you've encountered already Haggai and Zechariah. We'll talk more about them soon. When you read the book of Esther, that's the same kind of Persian period. It's actually a little bit interesting. We don't exactly know how Esther fits in to the Second Temple, to the return of Zion. Is it before? Is it after? But lots of interesting theories about that. But anyways, so as we've been walking our way through Tanakh, this is not the first time that we have encountered Shivat ציון, the period of time in which, after the first exile, after the Babylonian exile, we have a return of Jews to Zion and to Jerusalem. And this was and Ezra-Nehemiah really describes the difficulties of that process, of what it means to kind of say, yeah, we had this you see how established the Jewish people were. The character of Nehemiah himself, meaning we'll talk more about Nehemiah in a moment, but he serves wine to the king, meaning, and Ezra also, they're very well connected and powerful within the Persian monarchy, and then they pick up and they choose to go and support these efforts of the Jewish people returning to Israel and returning to Zion and rebuilding the temple. And the book really describes how difficult a process that is. And that's what this book is really about, of the reconstitution of a Jewish community in the land of Israel. Okay, so here's how the book opens. So Mishnah Echad Koresh Melech Paras, the first year of King Cyrus of Persia, Lichlot Devar Hashem mipi Yirmiyah, when the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah was fulfilled. Okay, so first of all, we have to ask, what do we mean by the word of the Lord spoken to Jeremiah? We'll look at that in just one moment. That's the next slide. He'ir Hashem et ruach koresh melech paras, v'yaver kol b'chol malchuto, v'gam b'michtav le'mor. The Lord roused the spirit of King Cyrus of Persia to issue a proclamation throughout his realm by word of mouth and in writing. If anyone remembers the book of Esther, the Persians loved writing. Everything goes out in writing and all these different languages, and they have this amazing kind of postal system. So too with Cyrus. Ko Amar Koresh Melech Paras, thus said King Cyrus of Persia, Kol Mamlechot Haaretz Natan li Hashem Elohei Hashamayim, the Lord of the heaven has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. Vehu fakad alai livnot lo vayit b'Yerushalayim asher b'Yehuda, and he has charged me with building him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. So this is how the book of Ezra opens. So here's what we're talking about when we're talking about that fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah. Jeremiah in chapter 29 says, Ko Amar Hashem ki lefi Milot leBavel shiv'im shana, when Babylon's 70 years are over. So we know that there will be a time when the Babylonian exile will end, and the book of Ezra opens with, that time is now. Babylonian exile is over, and the way that Jeremiah says that will happen is because you will call out to me and come to me. I will give heed to you. Uvikashtem oti, I'm in the bold part. Uvikashtem oti, metatem ki tidrashuni b'chol levavchem. You will search for me and find me if only you seek me wholeheartedly. And a sensitive listener knows that is a citation from Deuteronomy, where God promises that when there will be an exile, right? So it's the same. It's this very similar language of you'll search for me, you'll find me with all your heart. And Jeremiah says, yeah, like that's going to happen. That will happen. And the book of Ezra begins with, yes, like this has happened. This prophecy that Jeremiah made that's premised on the promises of the book of Devarim has transpired today. So that is kind of this historical moment as opened up by the first verses of the book of Ezra. Okay. Here's a slightly different telling. So this is in the British Museum. It's actually pretty small if you go see it in person, but it's a really big deal and a really cool thing. This is called the Cyrus Cylinder, and it records a different perspective on what's going on here. So here is King Cyrus talking about himself. I am Cyrus, king of the universe, a great king, the powerful king, king of Babylon, king of Sumer and Akkad, blah, blah, blah. I'm so awesome. Okay. Just look at this last line here. Marduk, the great Lord, bestowed on me as my destiny the great magnanimity of one who loves Babylon, and I every day sought him out in awe. So for him, it's all about service of Babylon. And what does he do in that service? He sends everyone back home. I sent back to their places the sanctuaries across the river Tigris, shrines that had earlier become dilapidated, the gods who lived therein, and made permanent sanctuaries for them. Right? So this is not just, oh, I have a relationship with the God of Israel, and therefore I am sending the Jews back to Jerusalem to go rebuild the temple there. No, this is a much more universal kind of movement. I collected together all their people, returned them to their settlements. I returned them unharmed to their cells in the sanctuaries that make them happy, right? So everyone, go back to where you came from, rebuild your temples, and all those gods in those places that I've returned you to, right? Look, this last line here, all the gods that I returned to their sanctuaries every day before Bel and Nabu ask for a long life for me and mention my good deeds. So what he wants is for everyone to go back to their own temples and their own places, and there to make their own local gods happy, and then their own local gods will intervene with the Persian gods on behalf of Cyrus. So that's kind of at least like the theology that's sort of set out here. And it doesn't necessarily reflect poorly, meaning whatever is happening in history is open to Jewish interpretation to say, like we might say, or someone else might say, yeah, like that's just part of some greater trend, or like it wasn't personal to you, or whatever. And the Jewish people, for us, it's open to interpretation to say, no, this was totally personal. This was totally God acting through history for the betterment of the Jews to fulfill promises prophesied by Jeremiah and laid out in Devarim. And that's kind of our interpretive right as happens in these opening verses of Ezra. But as you as you read other sources from the same time period or from Cyrus himself, you might see, okay, that's not exactly the story that he's telling, but that doesn't mean that we can't tell our own story, and that the Tanakh can't look at history and tell our own story through that. Okay, so now transitioning just to a little bit of background. I think if we were talking about sort of better known book of Tanakh, we wouldn't need to do this, but let's just review like kind of the main characters of Ezra-Nehemiah. Probably makes a little bit of sense to do. So we have many Persian kings get mentioned throughout this. We just started talking about Cyrus and kind of the opening of the return to Zion, the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah through Cyrus's actions. Cyrus is not the only king mentioned. We have actually a good number of Persian kings that get mentioned, and the order of these kings and how exactly they map on to what we know about Persia from other sources, let's say like Thucydides or other historical sources like that, is extremely unclear. And it's also very unclear whether at least the beginnings of Ezra are written in order or not. So meaning it seems to jump around a little bit, and do we apply this kind of principle of, well, these books aren't really history books, these books are theology books, and they don't need to go in order, they can be arranged thematically, or there might, some things might be out of order for interesting, important reasons that we should ask about. So we could go in that direction of like we say it about like the Torah in Mukdam Harva Torah, there's no earlier or later in the Torah. Or we could say, no, this actually is the order that things historically happened in, and we just need to figure out, maybe the names don't match up with the names that we think they ought to match up with or whatever. And it's just on us to kind of navigate that. So there's two different sort of directions that you can take when you're reading through these books and trying to map them onto what we know historically about Persian kings. So that's just, as you're reading through Ezra-Nehemiah, something to pay attention to, and maybe kind of open up an encyclopedia or your landmark Thucydides or whatever it is that kind of is your main access point to the history of Persia at this time. And that might be kind of an interesting project, especially for the beginning chapters of Ezra. We have a leader of the Jewish people, Zerubbabel. That name might be familiar to you from Maoz Tzor, but that's kind of Kate Bavel, Zerubbabel, right? So that's Zerubbabel there as a name. that is this guy, and he leads the first group of people to Jerusalem. So it's actually funny. Eventually, the like narrative voice in Ezra-Nehemiah switches, not infrequently. So it eventually becomes clear that Ezra is the speaker in the book of Ezra, and that Nehemiah is the speaker in most of the book of Nehemiah. But at the beginning, Ezra doesn't appear for a little while. Ezra doesn't really appear until the 7th chapter of the book of Ezra. And really the political leadership before then of the Jewish group that are the first people, they're kind of like the chalutzim, like the first groundbreakers to head back to Jerusalem under Cyrus's permissive decree, are led by this man named Zerubbabel, and he succeeds in laying the foundations for the temple, and kind of getting this group of people to go back with him, which is, a not small thing. But actually then the temple building gets stalled, and then you have a rise of prophetic leadership. So you have Haggai and Zechariah, who they get their own books in Treyasar also, and so we know a little bit more about them, but they get mentioned in Ezra. And that when the building of the temple gets stalled, eventually Haggai and Zechariah are the ones who say, no, like it's time now to just rebuild. And they get really lucky, and when the local authorities say, who gave you permission to rebuild, they kind of have this whole, we have all these letters, as I mentioned already at the beginning. There's a lot of letter writing in the Persian period. Books of Ezra and Nehemiah are no different. The letters we have are included in Tanakh in Aramaic, which is interesting. Often people think, the Aramaic in Tanakh is the book of Daniel, but it's also in Ezra and Nehemiah, in these letters, and they kind of use their prophetic authority to encourage the people to continue building. But then also when they kind of like get in trouble with the local authorities, they end up winning. Kind of Darius writes back and says, oh yeah, like of course, please, like build, here's stuff, like here's help, yes, like go for it. And so they play a really important role as well, and we learn more about that role. Again, not here to talk about Treyasar, but we learn more about exactly what kind of roles they were playing in their own prophetic writings that we find in Treyasar. Then we finally meet the character of Ezra. So he leads his own group of people, and these people are kind of like wealthier, more important. We also have a lot of like census taking throughout this book, and Ezra, when you read his census, you get the census of the people who came with him. You get the sense that these people were kind of like fancier, like just more important. He has not only is he a scribe expert in the teaching of Moses, Sofer Mahir, B'Torah Moshe, but he also has political authority from the Persian king to create a theocracy in Judah and Jerusalem, right? You're commissioned by the king and his 7 advisors to regulate Judah and Jerusalem according to the law of your God, which is in your care. Now, what exactly this theocracy looked like is extremely unclear, meaning it's clear that there are still other people around who seem to have authority and exercise it, who seem to have military power and even try and exercise it. We see that more in the book of Nehemiah even, so it's not a clear, like, here, this is a hunk of land, Ezra, I am giving it to you, like, goodbye, take care, set up your own government. It's not clear that that's exactly what ever happens, but he does kind of have this letter that you can see here. It's in Aramaic, which is the language of the letters, that kind of gives him that authority to set up a government according to the law of your God, which Ezra is an expert in, and which it's fascinating, like, meaning even not only does the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, and then also all of our kind of oral law kind of recognizes Ezra as this incredibly important person in the history of Jewish observance. We have decrees made by Ezra that last until today that are observed by Jews alive very much now, but his authority isn't just recognized by 21st century Jews, reading Torah or whatever, but it's also recognized by the political authority of the time, by the Persian king, which is just cool and interesting. And then we have Nehemiah. So the book of Nehemiah is spoken in Nehemiah's voice, and he's much more of a political leader, but also has these sorts of a little bit of so he starts out, he's serving wine to the king. That's when we meet him, to the Persian king. But he has the special relationship personally with God. He kind of does things every so often that prophets do, so that we would see, it's much easier to imagine Ezekiel doing or Jeremiah doing, where he'll kind of make a declaration, get people involved, and then he'll shake out a garment and say, just as I shook out a garment here, so too, blah, blah, blah. So he carries this weight of like political leader, prophet, warrior on behalf of the Torah, meaning he clamps down, he sees people breaking Shabbat, and he's very distressed by this, and uses political power and his own kind of authority to militate against that. So it's not only political, it's also kind of religious authority, and he works very closely with Ezra, who's really considered like kind of the expert. But the character of Nehemiah is really, really amazing and interesting in all sorts of ways. Okay, so that's just by way of introduction. I wanted to talk about 3 different scenes from this kind of new Jewish world that gets built with the return to Zion. And there's so much more that we could talk about, but these 3 are just really resonating with me like right now. So I thought I would share them with you. And yeah. So we have this moment right at the beginning. This is before Ezra comes back, and Zerubbabel gets it together to build the foundation of the temple, right? So v'yisedu abonim et heichal Hashem, ve'amidu hakohanim melubashim b'chatzotrot, ve'levim b'nei Asaf b'tziltayim lahalel et Hashem al-yedei David melech Yisrael. So they successfully laid the foundation of the temple, and everyone gets dressed up. The priests are in their vestments, and they have their trumpets, and the Levites are with their cymbals, and they're giving praise to the Lord as King David had ordained. Assume this is a nod to Tehillim maybe. And they sang songs extolling and praising the Lord, right? Again, right, very familiar. For he is good, his steadfast love for Israel is eternal. And all the people raise a great shout, extolling the Lord because the foundation of the Lord had been laid. So we have this kind of celebratory, exciting moment. We've come back, we've built this foundation for the temple, how amazing. And then what happens? Priests and Levites and chiefs of the clans, the old men who had seen the first house. So you have this older generation who are there. Asher ra'u et bayit harishon b'yasudo. And they wept loudly, bochim b'kol gadol, at the sight when their eyes saw the founding of this house. And everyone else, varabim b'tra b'simcha laharim kol. Many others shouted joyously at the top of their voices. So you have in this one moment, about this one exact same experience, you have an older generation who are crying and a younger generation who are ecstatic. And so first of all, different generations experiencing a historic event in different ways. I think that's kind of extremely resonant to this moment, and intergenerational kind of tensions with regards to historic events. I think also we're seeing, obviously not everywhere and not everyone in every generation, but I think that's definitely something that we're kind of feeling. But even without the generational element of this, I think you can really see that there can be one event where some people are laughing and some people are crying, and then the verses go on to say, and if you weren't right there sensitive to what was happening, the people could not distinguish the shouts of joy from the people's weeping. The people raised a great shout, the sound of which could be heard from afar. So there's just like a lot of noise. And I mean noise not just in the like audio way, but in a lot of like stimulation. There's a lot going on. And someone standing, an observer from further away, would just be like, okay, that was really loud, but like what is happening? And wouldn't necessarily even be able to distinguish who's crying, who's laughing, who's happy, who's sad. There's just like a lot of strong emotions all going on at once. And that's what's kind of being described here. You have one event and everyone's having these strong reactions to it, and everyone who's in the event and having the reaction knows what their reaction is, but an outsider is just hearing like, okay, there's a lot here. So just like a takeaway from that I've been thinking about a lot is that right now there's kind of a lot on offer in the Jewish world. Like I'm sitting here teaching Torah that's going to be put up by 929, please God. And other people are holding support groups, and other people are holding, around Rosh Chodesh Nisan, you could daven Hallel all day long you could say the Hallel prayers all day long, each time with a different amazing Jewish musician. And there's really a lot of tension of like, are we happy? Are we sad? How are we together in this moment? And how like and this reaction to like, oh well, my shul's having Kabbalat Shabbat, but for me it feels so inappropriate to be gathering and singing with other people, and I'm just not feeling it this week. And maybe that could come with like judgment vis-a-vis people who, that's what they need. They need to laugh. They need to find pleasure because they're like stuck at home and there's no escape. And so, yes, like I do want to, join this famous artist for like a doodling session. Like, yes, that's really going to do it for me. Or someone else is going to say, that's so inappropriate. This is such a serious moment. People are dying. How can you be, how can you be laughing? How can you be having pleasure? How can you anything like that? And I think one of the interesting things about the way this scene gets described is that those voices kind of all arise together. And there's a kind of space for both of them. Like, yeah, everyone's having these strong reactions. And someone on the outside, all they're going to see is like, yeah, this is eliciting a very strong reaction from everyone. And like, that's okay. That's okay. The thing should exist. We're glad, in retrospect, I think it's hard to say like, oh yes, like the establishment of the foundation of the Second Temple was a sad event. Like, no, like that wasn't a sad event, but your reaction to it is still recorded. The people who were sad about it, their reaction to it was still recorded for posterity because that was like a true and real reaction to it of like, I have seen, it wasn't so long ago, I saw the first temple when it stood, and it was way bigger and way more glorious and way more amazing than this tiny little foundation we've just set out. That's a real reaction, and that's an okay reaction, and I can be having that reaction while you're having a different reaction, and we can all kind of be held together in our responses to this moment, and that doesn't make it bad. And that doesn't mean that I'm ruining it for you or you're ruining it for me. We're just all in this together, having completely opposite experiences, but still unified. That's, I think, an important part also. It's like they managed to like be in the same place, having completely opposite emotional reactions, and their voices rise up together. And I think that can be just like a really helpful way to take it, because sometimes when someone reacts to something in a totally opposite way than you do, it leaves a really bad feeling in your mouth. Like, oh, are you judging me? Or do you like think I have poor taste? Or do you begrudge me my emotional experience? And I think the answer in our times has to be like the answer in their times, which is like, no, there's just a lot of noise right now, and everyone's having their own experience, and that's okay. And so I think that moment, that like emotional response in that moment is just really, really kind of interesting and important, and to me was really resonating. Okay. So the next piece is, as I mentioned in the outset, we're rounding up on Pesach here, and that is a time of joy. That is a holiday, a festival. And many years we're able to experience that as times of joy. Of course, every year there's people who don't have that privilege, people, let's say, who on a normal year who've lost someone right before Pesach, or who remember having Pesach with someone who was at their Seder last year, who this year can't make it. Often our happiest times are tinged with sadness. And this year I just think it's like a lot more widespread, as people can't be gathering together in big groups in the way that we normally do for this joyous time, and that could really kind of bring out the sadness. So what happens when you're feeling sad in a time when you're supposed to be happy? So here's a story from the book of Nehemiah. This is from Nehemiah 8. So Ezra brings out the Torah for people to start reading, and it becomes clear that people really, the people assembled did not totally know what happens in the Torah. And this story takes place B'yom Echad L'chodesh Hashvi'i, the first day of the 7th month, which we know that day to be Rosh Hashanah. Right. Okay. So that's it. That's interesting. So Ezra brings out the Torah before the congregation, men, women, all who could listen with understanding. And you have all these people there. Nehemiah's there, Ezra's there, the Levites who are explaining to the people, right? So you have like what exactly is the job of the Levites? Maybe Ezra's reading in Hebrew and they're translating, or maybe they didn't have microphones back then, so maybe they're kind of like saying it over so that people, the whole crowd, can hear. Anyways, so they read and they come to understand that Hayom Kodeshu Hashem Lokechem, this day is holy. Don't mourn or weep. But the people, as they're listening to the Torah, they're already crying. They're really sad. Like, how did we not know this until now? And by the way, today's Rosh Hashanah. And then their feeling is like, yeah, today's Rosh Hashanah. So actually, you're not allowed to have those feelings on this day, even though everyone's having this like really sad emotional experience of, hold on, like, why didn't I know about this? Why have I maybe become so distant from the Torah that I didn't know about this? Something like that. As they're reading the Torah, what they're learning is, hold on, but you have to be happy today. So what does that mean? That they're both weeping and being told not to weep. And so then they give these really kind of practical suggestions, which I love and I hope might help. So they say to them, go, ichlu mashmanim, shtu mamtakim, eat nice food, drink sweet drinks, send portions to whoever has nothing prepared, right? So even if you can't like invite other people into your Seder this year, maybe make sure, give mochitim, make sure that other people can have and are taken care of, because the day is holy to our Lord. So just first of all, like some of those like really practical, elements of like, okay, you're feeling sad. How are you going to anyways behave happily on this day? And that's going to be through physical things, because physical things can cause like stimuli in our lives that can make us happier. So like making sure you're eating right, making sure you're eating maybe something fancy, that can kind of lift the day up, even as there are so many other things about a day that feel sad. When we have to feel happy, then living that out through kind of not just, okay, I feel happy now, but okay, how am I going to feel happy? Oh, well, I have this like beautiful brisket that I'm going to eat, or like, I don't know, whatever vegetarians eat on Pesach. And that can really, and that can give a lift, in a way that I think, just telling yourself like my emotions are inappropriate or whatever is much less kind of practical. But then we have this next line, which I think is so, and then, sorry, before we get to that, and then also making sure other people are taken care of is a really beautiful way to kind of take some sadness and direct some of that energy towards, again, another like very practical thing. So that means, and you can do that in advance of Pesach, like calling people who you think are vulnerable and who are going to be lonely, making sure, like, make those phone calls before Yantiv, before the holiday starts, make sure to connect with people, make sure, like, that the vulnerable people in your neighborhood are taken care of. And that can really give you a lift to know I've taken care of the person who is le'en nachon, the person who has nothing prepared. So that can also be really, really helpful. Okay, but then we have this next line. Ki kadosh hayom la'Adonai, right? This day is holy to our Lord. Al te'atzivu ki chadvat Hashem hi ma'uzachem. Do not be sad, for rejoicing in the Lord is the source of your strength. And I think that also, sometimes it feels like, oh, it's like inappropriate to be happy during a pandemic. Like just read the newspaper and like feel sad, and that is how you're supposed to be feeling. And I think a line like this, Chadvat Hashem hi ma'uzachem, rejoicing in the Lord is the source of your strength, is just a really amazing kind of permission to have Yantiv in this time, to have a holiday, to have the ability to say, no, actually, like my control, in a time when everything feels out of control, my control over time, my control over the emotions related to time, and my relationship to the Almighty, like that is a source of strength. That is a source of stability in a world that feels so like thrown off kilter and scary, and our ability to say like, no, our relationship with God kind of supersedes that. I think is a really interesting idea, and how to manifest that idea, I think it has already been described, but that's sort of the message behind why it's important to actually persevere and try to have a happy Pesach, to have a happy Passover, is because that attempt and that desire for joy, even in difficult times and even through difficult emotions, that's a source of strength, and that can be a source of strength. So I definitely, wanted to bring you this line of Chavat Hashem hi ma'uzachem, and the people do that because so that's what happens, right? So people go, they eat, they drink, they send portions, they make great merriment, for they understood the things they were told. So just the takeaway in terms of like this section about sadness in times of joy is that, like, first of all, we're not the first ones. Like even in the book of Nehemiah, you have people crying on Rosh Hashanah, and the leadership of the people has to say to them, no, like now's the time to be happy, and here's how to get there, because it's hard, because you're right to be crying. Like it's not like, oh, you shouldn't be sad. They're not saying you're wrong, like your emotional response is wrong. They're saying it's not the right time for it right now. We have to deal with that. And here's maybe a way to kind of find how to make it joyous, even while you're having these like perfectly correct and healthy and normal emotions. And these very kind of practical ways of dealing with it through food and through special kind of physical manifestations in our homes that can prompt us towards happiness, and actions we can take that can prompt us towards feeling in control and feeling happy, and a knowledge that our calendar and our rejoicing with God in the times that are appointed to us, that's a source of strength for us and always has been. And that even as the world kind of seems so off balance and insane, that the Jewish calendar kind of marches on with the cycles of the moon, nonetheless, can be a source of strength, can be mu'uzachem. And I don't know, I've been really feeling that this year. Like there's something stabilizing about the fact that Pesach is coming, because you know what doesn't happen every year? Pandemics. But you know what does happen every year? Pesach. And there's something that's kind of very like, okay, I know what day of the week it is because I know when Pesach is coming. And I hope that Sfirat HaOmer will similarly kind of feel that way. And it really can be like our calendar can be a source of strength, and I hope that we all manage to find that strength this year, as the Jewish calendar makes claims on us and even on our emotions in ways that feel a little bit counterintuitive this year, honestly. Okay, so I want to talk about one last theme in these books, which is Jewish poverty. And actually, Jewish poverty is really a theme kind of simmering underneath the surface from the beginning until the very end of these books. You really, if you're reading these books with an eye towards attention to Jewish poverty, you will find it everywhere, and it bubbles to the surface in a few different places more explicitly. But the 5th chapter of Nehemiah is a really interesting one, where poor Jews come to Nehemiah and they say, listen, it's been awful for us. Like, we are in crazy debt for all different reasons. We're in debt, but we have to pay these really high taxes to the local authorities. And in order to do that, we've sold our property and we're selling our children. But we're selling them to Jews. So can you help us out? And the argument that they make, which Nehemiah finds extremely moving, is we're just as good as our brothers. Our children are just as good as theirs. We're one Jewish people, and yet we have incredible inequality within our community. Here we are subjecting our sons and daughters to slavery. Some of our daughters are already subjected. We're powerless. Our fields and our vineyards belong to others, meaning other Jews. And Nehemiah is like, this is wrong. This is not okay. We can't watch Jews suffering in this way. And so then Nehemiah gathers all of these, he gathers all these wealthy Jews, and he says to them, like, right, Nehemiah is clearly, it comes up over and over again, he's very wealthy. He tries to use his wealth for the betterment, meaning he then doesn't take money from other authorities, and he feeds a lot of people. And you see over and over again in the book of Nehemiah, like, I'm really trying to like use my wealth for the better here. And he gathers in all these wealthy Jews, and he says, what you're doing is not right. But he says, here's the part that I think is so interesting. Gam ani achai unarai noshim behem kesef v'dagan. He says, but listen, I'm one of you. Like, my brothers, my servants, we also have claims of money and grain against these poor Jews. All together now, nazvana et hamasa hazeh. Let us abandon those claims. Let us release the poor Jewish community from their loans to us. Let's return everything to them. Hashivun alahem kahayom, sedotehem, karmeim, zeteim, vateim. Let's give them back their vineyards, their olive trees, their homes, and let's abandon all of our claims and everything. And I think in part because he threw himself in with the leadership, and with these wealthier Jews, they're compelled by him, and they say, yeah, nashiv mehem v'lo nivakeshkin na'asa kasher ata omer. We shall give them back, not demand anything of them. We'll do just as you say. And I think one of the things that we're going to see, we see Jewish poverty as a constant, unfortunately, and amazingly, Jewish federations and many other organizations take it very seriously and spend a lot of time providing for the poorer elements within our community. But as we see an economy in turmoil right now, and presumably going forward as well, Jewish poverty is going to become an even bigger and bigger theme. And we need to be really attentive to it. It shouldn't get to the state of what was described to Nehemiah, meaning by the time you're at that place where you have Jews selling their children into slavery or Chanukah, like God forbid, like you've gone much, much, much too far. The whole situation has gone much, much, much too far. But what's described here is a world where parts of the Jewish community have a lot of agency to do something about it, and a lot of capability to help and to provide release from loans, and to help, and to just give people their lives back, that they've lost for all sorts of different reasons. And really, I skipped it, but like they list all these different ways that people have become poor, so to, as a takeaway from Nehemiah's leadership of just saying, like, yeah, I'm gonna go first in terms of taking a stand against this, and in terms of saying we're all connected, and Jewish poverty is a really serious issue, and I'm gonna do what I can to alleviate it, and pay attention to it, and hear the stories that these people have to tell, and what they've lost, and what they dream for, and figure out how to meet their needs. That's going to become, I think, I hope not, but it already is, in these times, like a really, really important calling of our community from all sides, from both the people who have new needs, who need to be ready to tell someone about them, the way that the impoverished community came to Nehemiah, and to go to your local community rabbi, or to go to whatever local resources there are and say, here's what happened to me and I'm in trouble. That's a really hard thing to do and a really scary thing to do, but you can't be heard unless you do it. And then on the other end, for those needs to get listened to in a deep way, and for people to dig deep into their pockets and give extremely generously, which we do see happening here in this story. And I think that's another important takeaway from these books about the interconnectedness of the Jewish people, and about how everyone's, the needs of the poorest members of our community are really need to be carried equally by everyone, all together, and need to be heard and acted on aggressively. And Nehemiah, I think, really models that, as someone who said, not when he goes and talks about these issues, doesn't just say, you guys need to go do this or whatever, but says, and here's what I'm doing also. That the leadership needs to model it, and that everyone needs to speak up about their needs, and everyone needs to be really attentive to that in terms of making sure communally that we can meet everyone's needs all together. So just want to leave you with, I guess, a little bit of a conclusion, which is that we live in crazy times. We live in challenging and scary times, and that ancient Jewish texts can help us think through some of those complexities, whether it's, wow, we were all at this one event and had massively different reactions to it. Does that make my reaction wrong or right or better or worse? Whether it's, I'm going into this time in the Jewish calendar where I'm supposed to be happy and I don't feel happy. What am I supposed to do about that? Or whether we're looking at times of real need within our community, and responsibility towards fulfilling those needs. And taking that seriously, and the leadership of our communities really stepping up to model what that looks like, to listen carefully and to take those needs as seriously as we possibly can. And it's always inspiring in some ways to see that our issues aren't new, that Jews have been here before in their own ways, in their own times, and that these moments that we're feeling now, we can find moments in Jewish history and in Tanakh that can really like speak to our experiences, in all sorts of different kind of interesting ways. So I hope you someday read Ezra-Nehemiah, because it's great and full of amazing gems. We only scratched the surface together in this, but also have a beautiful Pesach, and find a way to make it happy, find a way to hold the multiplicity of experiences that the people around you are going to be having, and to listen carefully to the needs of the Jewish community around you, because those needs are really heavy and they're going to get heavier. And we have a tremendous responsibility to talk about our needs and to meet each other's needs in whatever ways that we can. And I think Nehemiah really personally models that very beautifully, and hopefully we can all live up to the model set by him in that time. And have a beautiful Pesach, everyone.